She was abandoned at the altar, but that was the best thing that ever happened to her. Judith stood at the altar, her breath shallow, waiting. The grand hall, draped in white roses and flickering candles, had never felt so cold. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, subtle at first, then growing louder, a wave of whispers crashing against her ears. Her mother's grip tightened around her hand, as if trying to anchor her in place. But nothing could stop the slow realization unfurling inside her. Her groom was gone. Not late, not detained. Gone. For a long, aching moment, she felt trapped in a waking nightmare. Time fractured, stretching into eternity. The officiant cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Guests exchanged wary glances. The string quartet faltered, the melody twisting into uncertainty before fading into silence. Then, like a tidal wave, the weight of 100 gazes pressed down on her, crushing, suffocating. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, she was standing on the most beautiful stage imaginable, alone. A deep breath, another. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the world. She could crumble. She could run. She could demand answers no one had. Or she could rewrite the ending. Slowly, she reached for the microphone meant for vows. A shaky inhale. And then, ladies and gentlemen, her voice didn't break. It didn't waver. If anything, it rang with a clarity even she hadn't expected. It seems the groom has decided not to show. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Some people recoiled in discomfort. Others leaned in, unable to look away. Judith ignored them all. She exhaled, steadying herself, then continued. But I'm still here, and I refuse to let this be the story of my life. So instead of falling apart, she glanced at her mother, whose eyes brimmed with tears. I'm going on my honeymoon anyway. Gasps turned into murmurs. Murmurs twisted into quiet. Stunned admiration. The murky veil of humiliation lifted slightly, replaced by something unfamiliar, power. She wasn't going to be the girl abandoned at the altar. She was going to be the woman who walked away stronger. First-class ticket, window seat, one suitcase, no husband. Judith stared out at the airport's massive glass windows, watching the planes taxi down the runway, each one carrying someone to a future they had planned. Except hers wasn't planned. She was supposed to be holding his hand, sharing excited whispers about their honeymoon itinerary, laughing at some inside joke that only newlyweds understood. But instead, she stood alone, clutching her passport like a lifeline. The ticket agent had looked at her with mild surprise when she checked in, her name paired with an empty seat beside it. Traveling solo? The woman had asked, voice kind, brows slightly lifted. Guess so, Judith had replied, offering a smile she didn't fully feel. But now, watching the blinking flight board, her confidence wavered. Was she really going to do this? The boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. She hesitated. Then determination surged through her. She had already rewritten her wedding day narrative. Why stop now? Judith straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and stepped forward, handing over her boarding pass with a quiet but firm resolve. Judith had planned on flying alone. Fate had other plans. The lounge smelled of fresh coffee and polished leather, a quiet hum of conversation filling the air. She sank into a seat near the departure gate, sipping her overpriced latte, trying to ignore the weight of her wedding ring still tucked inside her purse. Then movement. A man, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, lowered himself into the seat beside her. Not rushed, not hesitant. Intentional. Judith stole a glance. Expensive watch. Crisp posture. Eyes sharp enough to miss nothing. Multimillionaire. Instinctively, she knew. Heading somewhere exciting. His voice was deep, measured, carrying the confidence of a man who didn't ask questions. He gathered information. Judith hesitated. Was she? Trying to, she said, forcing a small smile. He watched her for a moment, tapping his ringless finger against the armrest, as if weighing something. Then, with a slow, knowing nod, he leaned back. Funny thing about airports, he mused. They don't just take people where they plan to go. Sometimes they send them where they need to be. She wasn't sure why she answered him, Maybe it was a quiet confidence he exuded or the way he spoke, not like he was making small talk, but as if he saw something in her that needed to be said aloud. "I wasn't supposed to be here alone," she admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm paper cup of her fading latte. He didn't pry. He didn't ask. Instead, he nodded, as if he understood something deeper than the words themselves. "Sometimes the plans we make are the ones that trap us," he mused. "And sometimes losing those plans is the best thing that could happen." Judith let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "You sound like you know a thing or two about that." He leaned back, the faintest trace of amusement playing on his lips. "I do. Used to think success meant knowing exactly where I was going. Now I know it means being willing to go where I didn't expect." She studied him for the first time, really studied him. He wasn't just wealthy, he was seasoned. Someone who had built his world from experience, from failures, from pivots. He had seen a version of life few people ever did. "Where you headed?" she asked. "London," he said smoothly. Then after a beat, "You?" Judith hesitated. "Bali. For my honeymoon." A slow, knowing smile crossed his face. "Alone?" Her fingers tightened around her cup. Apparently, silence stretched between them. But it wasn't awkward. It was weighted, contemplative, filled with unspoken understanding. "Then I'll give you something to think about," he said, pulling a sleek leather notebook from his briefcase. "A challenge, if you will." Judith raised a brow. "A challenge?" He flipped open a page, scrawled something down, then tore it out and slid it toward her. "Before this trip ends," he said, "I dare you to do something you wouldn't have done if your life had gone as planned." Judith stared at the paper, heart pounding slightly against her ribs. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. She glanced at the words again, one short sentence. One bold choice. No hesitation. She met his gaze. "I'll think about it." "That's the first mistake," he said, standing up, buttoning his suit jacket. "You don't think about it. You just do it." And just like that, he walked toward his gate, vanishing into the sea of travelers. Judith looked at the note in her hands. One bold choice. She exhaled deeply. Maybe it was time to start. The sunset in Bali was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Wild streaks of gold and violet stretching across the sky like brushstrokes on a masterpiece. The air smelled of salt and adventure. She had spent the first 2 days exploring, dipping her toes into the unfamiliar, but never crossing the line between observation and experience. Until now. "Are you ready?" The instructor's voice was calm, steady, as he tightened the last strap of her harness. Judith swallowed hard, staring at the towering cliff edge. She had booked a paragliding session on impulse, a knee-jerk reaction to the stranger's note at the airport. One bold choice. No hesitation. And now she was standing at the edge, wind whipping her hair, heart hammering like a war drum. "All you have to do is run," the instructor said, adjusting her gear one last time. "The wind will take care of the rest." Run. It sounded so simple. And yet, she had spent years waiting. For the right moment, for the right person, for the promises that never came. She had tiptoed through life, careful not to disrupt what was expected of her. But now, she was done waiting. Judith inhaled deeply and ran. Her feet barely touched the earth before she was airborne, lifted by the wind, soaring into the endless sky. She screamed, half terror, half exhilaration. Then she laughed, freely, wildly, like she hadn't in years. She wasn't falling. She was flying. Judith walked through the bustling market streets, the scent of grilled spices and fresh fruit mingling with the ocean breeze. A few days ago, she had been hesitant, unsure of herself, tiptoeing to the unfamiliar. Now she moved with ease. She had learned how to haggle like a local, found a hidden beach only whispered about among seasoned travelers, and even danced barefoot under the stars with strangers who treated life like a celebration instead of a routine. Was this really her? She caught her reflection in the glass window of a tiny shop. The woman staring back looked different, brighter, lighter, stronger. Then a familiar voice cut through the hum of the market. "You've changed." She turned, and there he was, the mystery man from the airport. Judith blinked, momentarily stunned. She hadn't expected to see him again, yet somehow it felt right. "You never introduced yourself," she said, folding her arms, a smirk tugging at her lips. He chuckled, low, smooth, confident. "True. Thought I'd let the moment introduce me first." He extended a hand. "Nathan Sinclair." Judith took it. This time, she wasn't the same woman he had met before. And somehow, she knew this was only the beginning. "Absolutely. Let's give this story the depth and momentum it deserves." Now that Judith is stepping into her confidence and has crossed paths with Nathan again, we'll keep the journey evolving with high emotional stakes and unexpected turns. Judith felt the weight of his handshake, steady and deliberate. He hadn't been just another traveler at the airport. There was an intensity about him, a quiet authority that came from knowing exactly who he was. "You look different," he observed, hands slipping into his pockets. "That's because I am," Judith replied. She wasn't sure where the confidence came from. Maybe it was the paragliding. Maybe it was the way she had stopped waiting for life to tell her what to do. Whatever it was, she wasn't the same woman who had stood at that airport gate, uncertain about whether she had the strength to take this trip alone. Nathan studied her, a slow smile playing at the corner of his lips. "So tell me, did you make your bold choice yet?" Judith let out a small laugh. "Depends. Does running off a cliff count?" He raised a brow. "Paragliding?" She nodded, and he let out a low chuckle. "Not bad, but something tells me that wasn't the hardest part." She hesitated, because he was right. Jumping off a cliff had been exhilarating, but choosing to rewrite her life, to let go of the pain of what had happened, was the real leap. "I'm figuring it out," she admitted. Nathan nodded, as if satisfied with her answer. Then, just as smoothly as he had appeared, he glanced at his watch. "Come with me," he said. Judith blinked. "What?" "Come with me. Let's test how bold you really are." Something about the way he said it made her pulse flicker. She had already leapt once. Maybe it was time for another. Judith followed Nathan down a winding path near the beach, the sound of waves crashing against jagged cliffs filling the air. The warm breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility. She didn't ask where they were going, not because she didn't want to know, but because somehow she trusted that whatever it was, she needed it. "You ever been on a yacht?" Nathan asked casually, like he was asking if she'd ever tried a new flavor of coffee. Judith blinked. "Are you serious?" He smirked, leading her down a private dock where, anchored in the crystal-clear waters, was one of the sleekest luxury yachts she had ever seen. "I don't do halfway adventures," he said, stepping onto the deck and offering his hand. She hesitated for only a second before taking it. Maybe she didn't do halfway adventures anymore either. The yacht sliced effortlessly through the open waters, the golden hues of the setting sun painting everything in liquid fire. Judith stood near the edge, watching the horizon. Nathan handed her a glass of champagne. "To bold choices," he said, clinking his glass against hers. She smiled, taking a sip, savoring the crisp, cool taste. "So," he mused, leaning against the railing, "tell me, was paragliding really your boldest move?" Judith exhaled, staring into the distance. "No, it wasn't. I was supposed to be married," she said, voice quiet, but steady. Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't jump in with cheap sympathy or questions. He just listened. "He left me," Judith continued, "on the day, at the altar, in front of everyone." The word should have hurt, should have made her shrink. But saying them aloud here, in the middle of the ocean, with a man who understood things beyond surface levels, felt different. Nathan took a slow sip of his drink, studying her. "That explains a lot," he finally said. "Like what?" "Like why you've been spending your time proving something, not just to yourself, but to the world." Judith stiffened. "What, that I'm fine?" He tilted his head. "No, that you're unbreakable." Silence stretched between them, deep and charged. "Am I?" Judith asked, barely above a whisper. Nathan set his glass down, leaning closer. Not intrusive, not overwhelming. Just close enough that his presence steadied her. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "It's not about whether you're breakable. It's about whether you want to keep carrying something that no longer belongs to you. Judith blinked, her chest tightening. Had she been carrying it? Had she spent every moment of this trip trying to prove that she wasn't just a woman abandoned at the altar? She looked down at the ocean below, the waves twisting, shifting, moving forward, always forward. Maybe it was time to stop holding on. The yacht pulled into a secluded cove, the beach untouched, the world impossibly quiet. Ever been swimming in the open sea? Nathan asked. Judith laughed, shaking her head. First paragliding, now the ocean? You really want me to test my limits? I think you already have, he said simply. She hesitated for half a second, then stepped out of her sandals, letting the warm air press against her skin. Nathan peeled off his blazer, rolling up his sleeves. Let's make it official. And before she could say anything, he jumped, diving into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. Judith stared. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she jumped too. The water wrapped around her, cool and freeing. When she surfaced, laughing, Nathan was a few feet away, watching her like he had just confirmed something he already knew. That, he said, swimming closer, was not the action of a woman who was afraid. Judith smiled. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in a velvet shade of midnight blue. The yacht was anchored, the quiet lapping of the waves the only sound between them. Judith sat on a cushioned bench, wrapped in a towel, warmth lingering on her skin from their plunge into the sea. Nathan stood nearby, rolling his sleeves back down, securing the buttons with practiced ease. Everything about him was intentional. So what happens next? He asked, leaning against a railing, his gaze steady on hers. Judith exhaled, staring at the ocean. What do you mean? You came here to heal, to prove something to yourself. But now you've crossed into new territory. You're not just surviving this, you're shaping it. She stared at him, searching for denial that should have risen. But it didn't, because he was right. So what happens next? He repeated. Judith leaned back, tilting her head toward the sky. I stopped making decisions based on what I lost. Nathan's gaze flickered with something unreadable. Good answer. As the night stretched on, conversation flowed between them, effortless and charged. Judith had learned things about Nathan, his travels, his perspective, the way he spoke as if life was something meant to be commanded rather than simply experienced. Why did you give me that challenge? She asked, swirling the champagne in her glass. Nathan smirked. Because most people live their lives asleep. I want to see if you were awake. Judith raised a brow. And was I? His gaze lingered on her, assessing. You are now. The space between them felt different. Heavy, but not suffocating. Alive, but not chaotic. And Judith realized she hadn't thought about him. About the man who had left her. Not once. As the yacht docked back at the private marina, Nathan turned to her. Whatever happens next, you decide. Judith met his eyes, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about revenge, or proving something, or erasing what had happened. It was about the life she was finally claiming as hers. And that was a power no one could take away. The sun had barely risen when Judith stepped onto the terrace of her villa, the horizon stretching infinitely before her. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, she felt weightless, not because the pain had disappeared entirely, but because something inside her had shifted. This wasn't just about healing. It was about choosing, and she was about to make the boldest choice yet. Judith sat at the small wooden table overlooking the ocean, her laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. For months, she had toyed with the idea. Something small, something tentative. But today, she wasn't hesitating. She was launching her own brand, not just a blog, not just a creative project, a movement, a space where she could turn her experience into strength, not just for herself, but for women everywhere, women who walk away. She typed the title, staring at the words, a platform for those who had been abandoned, discarded, underestimated, a place for those who had survived heartbreak and turned it into fuel. She wasn't writing about sorrow. She was writing about what came after. And as she clicked publish, sending her first message into the world, she knew this wasn't just a bold choice. It was her new beginning. Judith was finally stepping into her new self, her new life, free from the chains of heartbreak. But as she stood on the terrace of her villa, watching the waves roll in, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Nathan than what he let on. He had met her in an airport, challenged her to step out of her pain, push her past her limits, but never once had he told her his own story. Until tonight. I came here to heal too. Judith looked up from her laptop, caught off guard by the quiet confession. Nathan stood near the doorway, sleeves rolled up, his usual polished demeanor slightly cracked. "What happened?" she asked, setting her drink down, studying him. Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Caught her with someone else. Someone who didn't have the money, the power, the name, but had something she wanted more. Judith's heart clenched. Love. Nathan let out a low, bitter laugh. Freedom. She didn't speak. Just let him unravel the truth. She wanted the luxury, the image, but she didn't want me. Not really. She wanted what came with being with me. Judith swallowed, recognizing the pain in his voice, the same pain she had carried. "So you left." Nathan shook his head. She was the one who left. But I walked away from a version of myself who let it happen. Silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. Judith leaned forward, hands clasped together. "Do you miss her?" Nathan studied her for a long moment. "I miss the idea of her." Judith exhaled. "I know that feeling." And there it was, the moment that shifted everything. They weren't just strangers who had met by chance. They were two people who had been broken in different ways, and somehow they had found each other on the other side of it. "So," Nathan said, voice lighter this time, "what happens next?" Judith smiled. "We stop surviving. We start living. And maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to do it alone." The air in Bali was different that evening. Calmer, charged with something neither Judith nor Nathan could name. They sat on the terrace of a small cafe tucked away from the tourist-heavy streets, watching the lanterns sway gently above them, the glow casting soft shadows against the darkened sky. "It's strange, isn't it?" Judith murmured, swirling her wine. Nathan looked at her, waiting. He had learned that she didn't need prompting to share her thoughts, only patience. "How heartbreak has a way of putting things in perspective," she said, meeting his gaze. Nathan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Or shattering the perspective we once thought was real." She nodded. They weren't just two people nursing past wounds. They were two people redefining what their lives could look like without the weight of those wounds dictating every choice. It had started as simple conversation, honest, unguarded exchanges about life, loss, and rebuilding. But somewhere between the laughter, the shared silences, the way he listened without judgment, something was shifting. Judith wasn't sure if she was ready to find it, and maybe that was the beauty of it. As they left the cafe, walking along the quiet shoreline, Nathan suddenly stopped. "Judith." She turned. His voice had changed. Something deeper, something unspoken threading through the air between them. "You know what I think?" he asked, his eyes locked onto hers. She swallowed. "Tell me." "I think you stopped waiting to be saved." Judith felt her pulse flicker. He was right. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't doing it alone. The warm glow of lanterns flickered in the distance as Judith and Nathan walked back toward their respective villas. But neither of them seemed eager to say goodnight. The conversation had changed, no longer just about healing, about independence, about reclaiming themselves. It was about each other now. And that was dangerous. Not because they weren't ready, but because they both knew the cost of getting it wrong. Judith stopped abruptly on the pathway, forcing Nathan to pause a step ahead. "Are we ignoring this?" she asked, voice quiet but firm. Nathan turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Ignoring what?" She sighed, crossing her arms, but not in frustration, in hesitation. "Whatever this is," she said. Nathan studied her, his gaze holding hers for longer than necessary. "I don't know," he admitted. "Are we?" That was the problem. They weren't just ignoring it. They were terrified of it, of what it could mean, of what it could ruin, of what it could build. Judith exhaled, dropping her arms, tension bleeding out her shoulders. I don't want this to be another mistake. Nathan's jaw tightened. Then let's not make it one. Her pulse flickered. Too late. She already cared. Neither of them had planned for this. To meet each other in the middle of their healing, to become part of each other's journey instead of just walking it alone. But what if stepping into this meant undoing all the progress they had made? Judith swallowed hard, glancing at him one last time before stepping back. Good night, Nathan. A beat of silence. Good night, Judith. And just like that, the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was a choice. For now. The final morning in Bali arrived too quickly. The golden sunrise stretched over the ocean, bathing everything in warmth, but Judith couldn't shake the chill in her chest. Nathan stood beside her on the quiet balcony, coffee in hand, the weight of the inevitable pressing between them. Are you ready to go back? He asked, voice low. Judith swallowed. I don't know if I ever want to go back. Not because she was afraid, but because this place had changed her, and because leaving meant walking away from him. Nathan exhaled, turning toward her. You'll be fine. You're not the woman who got left at the altar anymore. She met his gaze. And what about you? I don't know, he admitted, but I have a feeling this isn't over. The moment lingered. Too much unsaid, too many possibilities left hanging in the air. And yet, when the time came, they walked away. For now. Days passed, then weeks. Judith threw herself into her new life. The brand, the platform, the movement she had started in Bali. The attention it was gaining was unreal. Women from all over were reaching out, sharing their stories, lifting each other up. And yet, she still thought about him. At night, when she sat by her window, staring out the city below, at moments when laughter filled her lungs, only to fade just a little too soon. And it wasn't just her, because Nathan felt it too. Every meeting, every luxury event, every conversation. Nothing felt quite right. I'm losing my mind, he muttered one evening, pacing the floor of his penthouse. Then, without a second thought, without hesitation, he booked a flight. For the first time in his life, he wasn't controlling the outcome. He was just following what felt right. Judith stepped into the same church she had been abandoned in, but this time it was different. The guests were waiting. The flowers were perfect. The music was playing. And standing at the altar was Nathan. She had barely taken 2 steps down the aisle before the doors swung open behind her. Her ex-fiancé. Judith, please. The air froze. Gasps rippled through the church. He rushed toward her, desperation in his eyes. I made a mistake. I left because I was scared. But I realize now, you are everything I ever wanted. Judith didn't move. She didn't need to, because she knew. There was no hesitation in her heart anymore. She wasn't lost. She wasn't waiting for someone to choose her. She had already been chosen. Judith turned to Nathan, her pulse steady. I already found everything I ever needed. Nathan smiled. The ex lowered his head, defeated, knowing he had lost her forever. And then Judith married the man who had shown her how to live again. Judith and Nathan stood at their honeymoon villa, watching the ocean waves crash against the shore. Crazy, isn't it? She murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. What? Nathan asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. That everything had to fall apart so it could all fall together. Nathan smiled, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Some things, he whispered, are just meant to be. And this, them, was one of them. This isn't just a story. It's proof that heartbreak doesn't define you. If you've ever faced a moment that felt like the end, but turned out to be a new beginning, drop a comment and share your journey. Like and subscribe if you believe in second chances. Tell me, what's the boldest choice you've ever made? Share this with someone who needs to hear this message today. Let's inspire each other, because sometimes life's biggest disappointments turn into its greatest blessings.